This conference will now be recorded.
I would suggest that's a good sign. All right, why don't we get started, everyone? Good morning. My name is Brian Hahn, and I have the privilege of being the senior leader of your association, BILD Calgary region. I would like to welcome you and all, and thank you for joining us today for our COVID-19 finance options webinar. I'm not sure the label is absolutely perfect, but we're going to go with that for today. As I'm sure it's no secret to everyone, we're all facing a bunch of challenges coping with what the COVID-19 public health crisis has forced upon us. We can be somewhat grateful that all orders of government are doing their very best to offer some measure of relief, different for the orders of government, but some measure of relief to help mitigate some of the financial issues that I expect each and every one of us are contending with, both in our personal lives and in our work lives. Some of the challenges are forcing many of our members to consider a number of changes to their business models. And there may be things such as financial assistance that have been offered through the various government programs that may be of interest and may help provide an ability to adapt business models and keep going. Both the relief measures and the proposed mechanics by which those operate are pretty dynamic, and I think we have to expect that they may change. And even one of our presenters this morning was indicating that as he was making a presentation yesterday, they were changing in real time. Some of the qualifying hurdles are not crystal clear right at the moment, and some of those may get fine-tuned as we go forward. As much as we might like to say differently, your association are not experts, and our speakers here today may not have every answer for all the questions. But you can rest assured that we are as up to date as we possibly can be in this very fast changing, quickly developing realm. And as our guest presenters today from MNP LLP, I better get that right, MNP LLP are able to bring us up to speed on developments as they sit here this morning. As for protocol, I'm gonna, in a second here, mute everyone's microphone. That just works best. And I know everyone heads into these meetings with the best of intentions, but inevitably somebody forgets to mute their microphone, and they're either driving and we get that background noise, or we get to hear how their dog barks, or the latest details of what their kids need for the moment. By doing that, it's the best that we can assure that everyone can hear the presenter. So at BILD, we've been using meeting technology, and you can see the point. My point is being made right now. We've been using this meeting technology for a number of meetings, and it's gone pretty well. This is bigger than the typical meeting. It looks like we're going to be in the 65 to 70 group here by the time we finish today. And the number of connections may slow things down a bit, so we ask for your patience if we have any technical issues. We also ask you to help minimize the load on the network, that if you're not a presenter, if you could turn off your video feed, that helps. You should still be able to see the presenters. And as much as we'd love to see you, we're just going to have to save that for hopefully happier times to come that come relatively soon. In terms of the questions for the speakers today, the most effective way for us to undertake that is for you to text your question in the chat feature that should be on the right-hand side that you're using for GoToMeeting. I will moderate the questions. If you could be so kind as to include in your chat question request that your name and the company so I can introduce you. That way, if we, for whatever reason, don't have a chance to get to your question, we can get it answered afterwards and send it off to you. Our speakers have indicated today that all of them have an availability to 9 a.m. one has to leave at 9, and then we'll do our best to carry on. I suspect we're probably going to run out of time and ability to stay on not too much longer after that. So with those preliminaries out of the way, I'm going to introduce, actually, just before I introduce our speakers here, I'm going to mute everyone's mic. I'll unmute myself. So hang on a sec here. So I think I have muted everybody. Oh, and you can still hear me. And then as we get to each of the speakers, I will unmute them, and just be patient. That can be a little bit of a mechanical process for us, so we just have to take our time. So to officially begin, please let me introduce our first guest from MNP LLP, Michael Rattan. Michael is a partner in the Assurance Services Group and is a real estate and construction niche leader for the Calgary region. Mike works with private businesses in the real estate, construction, and manufacturing industries, and has over 20 years of experience supervising audit, review, and accounting engagements. Mike has also assisted clients with tax reorganizations and has consulted on a variety of accounting and finance-related issues. Thank you to you and your team for joining us today, Michael. And if you just give me half a sec, I will turn the floor over to you. And look, there you are.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with your membership today. These are very interesting times, and as you've mentioned, things are changing by the moment, and there's the announcements, the official announcements. There's the things that are posted to the websites of the various, the various federal and provincial governments. So it is very fluid, and so we're presenting with the most current information we have. I guess just as a quick introduction to the firm, for those who aren't familiar with MNP, we are a full-service firm, a Canadian firm, and we're unique in a few ways. So one of those ways really is that we focus on entrepreneurs of all stripes. So we work with established and emerging entrepreneurs, big and small. We have a very diverse client base, and we really have focused on entrepreneurs and how we can work with them. A second way that we're quite different is that we're the only large firm in Canada with a head office in the West. So our head office is here in Calgary, and with that, we really bring an understanding and a perspective of the West and the Western values. So very much integral to our firm, and it's amazing how pervasive that is throughout the firm and how we operate. The final way that's probably most relevant to this group is that we've really identified the real estate and construction and all of the supporting businesses around that as an area of focus for the firm. So we're trying to build a center of excellence, a knowledge base within the firm on that. In each of our regions, we have teams dedicated to the real estate and construction niche, as we call it. And there's a lot of coordination between regions. So often, if we don't know an answer in Calgary, we can reach out to another practitioner in our network and have a chat and hopefully get an answer for everyone. So that's just a brief overview of the firm. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing some of my colleagues for the presentations. So the first one up is Steve Kwasny. Steve is part of our Public Affairs Advisory Group, and he has a background in government affairs, crisis management, and a number of other things. He acted as an advisor to the Minister of Flood Recovery and Reconstruction after the 2013 floods. So he has obviously some background with crisis and intervention. Steve, at the moment, Steve's role in the firm has been to really monitor all government announcements and programs, and he's really probably the most up-to-date person in our firm on these things. He updates us internally twice a day. That's down from 3 times a day just a couple days ago. And as well, he is responsible for a lot of our communication with our clients through our COVID portal. So we do have a portal that's accessible from our website, mnp.ca, and that's where the most recent information is coming through. Our second presenter today is Dylan Hughes. Dylan is a partner in our tax group and a member of our real estate and construction niche team here in Calgary. Dylan has a great breadth of experience, depth in compliance, tax compliance, as well as planning. And probably most importantly for today's meeting is that Dylan has been leading the charge in our office in understanding the rules and programs as they come out, assessing the implications of them, and how do we apply them in real life with our clients. So he's been busy over the last couple of weeks with all that's come out. With that, I'll turn over the presentation to Steve to give his perspectives on this.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for having us. Yeah, as Michael spoke to, my name is Steve Wozniak, and I'm a manager in our public affairs practice in the firm. And so wear 2 hats. Well, on one hand, I help clients through external issues that impact their businesses, as well as now helping the firm through an external issue that's impacting our business and the business of our clients. So I guess at the outset, I wanted to say, kind of at the top, that this is, it's been said so much it almost has become meaningless, but it is truly unprecedented. And to provide some scale for what the government, all levels of government have been going through or thinking about, I did pull off of Veterans Affairs Canada that roughly the announcements in the last 3 weeks have equated to our entire World War II production as a country, adjusted for inflation, about $100 billion. That was to get through World War II. This is to get through about 3 months. So the scale is pretty massive. I don't know if we really have a word for it. So understanding that there are a lot of frustrations, understanding that announcements can't come fast enough and they're not detailed enough, and and we'll talk about some of what's been announced to date. But I just wanted to say that at the top, that the speed and the scale at which all governments are moving in the country is actually truly remarkable. From a federal perspective, they're balancing a number of challenges, and primarily it's trying to keep liquidity in the economy and keep people employed as best as they can. It's a challenging situation they're in, where I've seen it described lots as a moving target, and this is where you've seen a whole flurry of programs announced over the past 3 weeks to address all or part of it, or as much as they can, and those would include things like the Canada Emergency Temporary Wage Subsidy. That was the announcement yesterday. The 75% program, based on if industries or businesses have seen a 30% decline in their year-over-year revenues when compared to the same month last year, with a caveat that they will come out with benchmarks or other potential benchmarks that they'll use to measure revenue shortfalls if you didn't have revenue perhaps in this time last year, or if there's a reason why that doesn't make sense. The temporary wage subsidy program, which is the 10% program that lots of people have heard about, which is the payroll remittance, where you don't have to remit your payroll deductions to cover the 10% wage subsidy. That is also still applicable, and that wasn't until the minister announced that yesterday that we knew whether or not those two things were going to interface. And so you can access both. It's not exactly clear what the relationship between the two will be, but there's potential to access both. There's also the federal work share program that's been significantly extended, as well for those that are experiencing perhaps a reduction of hours or reduction of work. The Canada Business Account is yet another one. That's the interest-free loans until December 31st, the $40,000, and then with an option to convert that into another type of financial product that I'm sure Dylan might get into in terms of how to apply these things. You don't want me to give you specific advice, as I'm the furthest thing from an accountant, but there is potential in accessing that. And then the other major program that the federal government had announced is the BCAP program. That's the BDC and EDC program, and their loan program. That's just the highlights from a federal perspective. Of course, there's the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which is at the individual level. That'll be made available April 6th for folks that have been laid off due to COVID. And I think that's a point I should touch on. And as we're talking to the provincial response, it becomes even more salient. But we're actually dealing with two distinct crises right now as an economy. There's the COVID crisis, which is a tremendous immediate response requirement, and then there's the collapse of oil prices, and many, if not all of you on this call, will be intimately aware of that. And so there are some challenges within this, because those are separate but often conflated challenges, and it is hard to tease them apart. So not all programs, at least from their outset, and this might change over time as eligibility broadens, but not all programs for the COVID relief actually qualify for or are eligible for folks that are experiencing reductions due to the oil price collapse. So that's been a cause of concern and confusion with a number of folks, and I know from personal and direct conversations with the province of Alberta and the folks around the cabinet table that they're well aware of that, and they're working to address some of those challenges. So that's why you'll see from the province kind of two streams of announcements. There's the immediate COVID related stuff, and then there's the oil price collapse challenges that's more, that has still some additional short, medium, and long-term challenges that need to be looked at as well. So, from the province's perspective, they've announced a series of other programs. Lots of it is was previously waiting on the federal programs to now see how the provinces across Canada can then translate what the federal government's doing and then fill some holes that might be specific to the province. And likewise, you'll see that cascade down to the municipalities. And I've seen that that your association, that BILD Calgary, has pulled together a great summary of what the municipalities that you operate in are doing in terms of things like utility deferrals, property tax deferrals, and that kind of stuff. I would suggest that we have not seen the end of the measures that will be forthcoming. I think there's certainly every level of government has left the door open for more, and it is a moving target. It's a significant challenge to figure out what are the right measures at the right time. Understanding what types of policy measures we have. There's been some unprecedented changes with the CMHC, the Bank of Canada, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. If there's a lever that regulatory bodies can pull, they are all looking and pulling them. And it's just the challenge. One of the many challenges is to coordinate that and to make sure that there aren't sort of undue issues from how those things interface. A lot like a prescription drug relationship or reaction sort of process. So making sure that they all interact properly together. There are lots of things you can do now while we wait for further details for application portals to open. Lots of that will come in the next week or two or a few weeks, and then checks will start to roll in over time. Again, nothing will ever happen fast enough, but there are things that you can do, and I'm sure Dylan and Michael can chat with you further about what those things are in getting your business ready, because once these systems open, you can imagine there's going to be some pretty immense lineups. So you want to make sure that you're you've got your stuff together, so you don't have to hop back in line afterwards. You know, for context on the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, you're looking at there's 2.1 million Canadians that applied for unemployment in the last couple of weeks. So there's going to be lots of people in that lineup, for lack of a better analogy. Bringing it back up to sort of a higher level, you know, from an association perspective and from a business perspective, the province, especially, as well as I'm sure your municipal governments, are all open to ideas. They're all open to solutions. I would encourage you through your association and through the provincial bodies to think through, you know, what has been working, what are the issues that are keeping you up at night that perhaps haven't been addressed, and bring forward constructive, you know, sort of solutions to the regulatory bodies on things that could help in the short, medium, and long term. Because I guess the other thing I would say to this is there's the immediate cash flow concerns, and those are extremely real. You know, the Premier was musing on a call I was on the other day with him. Musing's probably the wrong term, but preparing folks that, you know, with this combination of issues, we're probably looking at unprecedented unemployment rates that we haven't seen in the province since the Depression, that will be prolonged for some time. Like, it's, you know, this won't all be done by May long. There's going to be more, even if we're lucky enough and the public health measures do rise shortly, there's going to be lingering impacts of that. So from a short, medium, and long-term perspective, I think that's, you know, that's where folks are starting to think. Obviously, we're still in the response or the triage point of the in terms of the response recovery spectrum, but recovery isn't you know, a particular point in time. It's a transition, and so what you can do now to start preparing for recovery is equally important. That's kind of the highlights. I don't know, we can get into more questions, and the other folks from MMP, my colleagues, will be able to talk a bit more about how do you apply this information then to your business. But I just want to say that from the high level. And I guess the other thing I forgot to touch on was the essential services list. Many of you have probably seen the construction industry has been deemed as essential. There's still a requirement to follow the public health orders, and I understand you had a safety discussion previously. So I don't have a lot more to add on that, other than if there are gaps in the essential services list and it does need to be addressed, I would encourage your association to work through the provincial associations and have that discussion with the relevant minister, because, you know, they're definitely not like looking to change the list, but if there's reasons, they are looking to keep the economy going, obviously, and keep commerce going where they can. So take a look at that. So I guess that's kind of where I'll wrap up my comments. There's lots of other stuff. There's lots of things I don't want to speculate on what could come next, because things are changing by the minute. But you know, there's some potential, like I said, for more to come. So I'll leave it there and maybe pass it over to Dylan.
Okay, hi everybody, and yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. That's super insightful. So, like Mike said, I'm a tax partner in our Calgary office of MNP, and one of the things that we've been forced to look at over the last little while is to sort of step outside of the box of tax and look at all these different government subsidy programs. And as you guys have seen, there's been a number of them. What I'd like to do today is focus pretty acutely on one of the major ones that we received quite a bit of additional information on yesterday, and that's the wage subsidy program. I'm sure that a lot of you have looked at that or are very curious to know what those details are. So I'm going to go through that in quite a bit of detail here, or at least as much as we know right now. And just sort of encourage you to reach out to your own advisors about that as it pertains to your situation. So like Stephen mentioned, there was a number of programs that were initially conceived to deal with this crisis. One of them was an immediate expansion to EI, which didn't really seem to work. And then we had this Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was announced, I don't know, a week and a half ago or so. That's sort of like the $2,000 a month, and that was essentially designed for those who are truly laid off and aren't working. So as business owners or operators, to the extent that you do have employees that are laid off, I would expect that many of them would be applicable for that. It's not specifically an EI program, but rather an expansion. Well, I guess it's an expansion of the previously existing EI program. And then we saw 2 weeks ago this sort of 10% wage subsidy program being announced. And there was pretty much major calls for the expansion of that program right from the outset, followed up by last Friday, Prime Minister Trudeau announcing that they were going to go to a 75% wage subsidy program. So I'm going to spend some time here talking about that. I wanted to be clear though that the 10% program hasn't disappeared. It's still available in the event that your business or you don't qualify for the 75% program. So the 75% wage subsidy program is referred to as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, so CEWS for short. And what it's intending to do is to provide a 75% wage subsidy to employers who have experienced a revenue drop of 30% or more. So I just want to address a few of the questions that I repeatedly got about this before we had any information. One is that how would we determine whether or not we qualify for a revenue drop of 30%? And the government yesterday clarified that, and they said pretty clearly that you're going to use your March revenues from 2020 as compared to your March revenues from 2019 to determine your applicability of this program. So that means that you're going to have to get your March accounting records up to date and also pull that same information from the prior year. And the intent here is that you would just take your gross revenue. This is not a net profit test. This is going to be your gross revenue from March of this year compared to March of last year. And you're supposed to remove from that gross revenue any, let's say, extraordinary items, so anything unusual, and also any capital dispositions. So if you've sold property, plant, equipment, or other property, that's not counted towards this 30%. So it's probably a good idea at this point to make sure that you've got those figures handy. It's also worth noting that this 30% drop, they're actually going to make business apply for this 3 times. There's 13 weeks that are covered, and they're going to make you do 3 separate applications. And even if your March revenues did not drop by 30%, in the event that your April revenues dropped by 30% as compared to April of 19, you could actually potentially be ineligible for this program in the first month and then eligible for the program in the second month. So again, there's 3 periods. It's March over March, April over April, and then it will be May over May. And you will have to apply 3 times, and I will get into some of the administrative issues that are going to come along with that application very shortly. The other good thing about the CEWS program, that's the 75% program as compared to the previously announced 10% subsidy, is that the list of who is eligible to receive this was significantly expanded. Originally, it was just intended to be for truly small businesses. Now it's pretty much anybody. So if you are operating your business either as an individual and you have other people on payroll, or you're incorporated, or even if you operate your business through a partnership, as long as that partnership has individuals or corporations as its owners, your company and your business will be eligible for this subsidy. It's also probably not on this call, but it's also expanded to NPOs and charities. That's nonprofits. And when it comes to the revenue, like I said, it has to be a 30% drop. And what they're looking at is your revenue from Canadian sources and not revenue from related businesses. So you're going to count all of your revenue from arm's length sources. That's your normal customers, and also if you have US or out of country operations, it's not going to include revenue from those sources. So use your normal accounting, like I suggested. Now let's get into how much they're actually going to pay. And I'll come back to this later because there's some interesting issues, not just with the amount, but the timing. There's a lot of talk about this being a 75% wage subsidy. And what they've done is they've said they will, that is, the federal government will subsidize 75% of $58,700 per year. And what that really amounts to is they're actually going to do a 100% subsidy of 75% of that number. So that is $847 per week that the government will subsidize. They're asking you, the employer, provided you're an employer, they're asking you, the employer, to use your best efforts to pay the pre-crisis wage of the employee that you're keeping on, or at least to pay the additional 25% that they're not covering. But they seem to be alluding to the fact that even if you aren't able to pay that other 25%, if all you do is pay the subsidized amount, that they will give you 100% of that 75%. So in other words, if all you can afford to do is to pay an employee $847 a week, they will fully subsidize that amount. That's what they're saying. I have to, again, sorry that we keep prefacing things, but these rules change as they go. And I expect there's going to be detailed legislation that may change some of these things. So be carefully monitor this. But my thought is that they're saying they're going to actually pay 100% even up to that specified amount. Okay, so what's this going to be based on? This is going to be based on essentially salary or wages that are paid from March 15th onwards. It's not going to apply to severance if you did lay anybody off and paid severance. And there's going to be a special rule for the owner managers themselves. So like a lot of our clients, you run your business and you're also an owner in the business. Interestingly, they announced a special rule is going to apply to the owners themselves. In other words, we'll call it the non-arm's length parties to the business. However, in their release, they didn't actually say a lot about what that special rule was going to be. In fact, they sort of implied that it was going to apply to owners the same way that it would apply to non-owners. So that's a huge question in my mind, and it's going to be one for a lot of my clients are going to be asking me. Why would you impose a special rule for the owners and then give them the same benefit as everybody else? My feeling is that time will tell, and they may actually change the requirements for owners. So as of right now, what I'm saying is this is really, I think this is intended to be a plan for the employees and not necessarily for the owner managers. Or if you have a small business and it's just you or just you and a helper or contractor, I'm not sure that they want this to apply to you or not. I just can't tell. They've written it such that it applies to you, but I'm very skeptical because they said there's this special rule. So again, the eligible periods that are going to qualify here is wages paid in those three chunks. And the first eligible period is again March 15th to April 11th of this year, and that's your subsidy is going to be based on the wages that you actually paid in that period. Okay, and then your eligibility for being subsidized in that period is going to be based on your March over March revenues. And then that kind of process will repeat itself over the next 3-week period and the next, or I believe 4-week period and the next 4-week period. So now let's get into the brass tacks here. When are they actually going to pay this money? In the presentation that Morneau gave yesterday, he indicated that they weren't actually going to be paying this money for at least 6 weeks. And then I've heard some other sources say that they're going to pay this money between 3 and 6 weeks from now. And then I've heard some sources say that they won't even be launching the application for this subsidy for 3 to 6 weeks. So I actually don't know what the real answer is, but based on what Bill Morneau said, we're not actually expecting any payments to be made for 6 weeks. So that is to say that it appears that the onus for the operation of this program has been placed upon business owners. I think the reality of the situation might be that the government has realized that they themselves cannot roll out the kind of benefits that are needed in this circumstance, but they know that employers, in theory, can, because you already have people who are on payroll. So as much as they're calling it a wage subsidy program and a benefit for employers, I think they're actually asking employers to participate in the flow of funds of the economy. So because they don't have the programs or ability to administer this kind of widespread payment themselves, they're asking employers to participate. So it makes a very difficult decision if you're in the position where maybe you've issued a layoff notice but haven't laid anybody off, or you're just thinking about whether or not you lay people off, or how many, or whether you pay subsidized or some augmented version of their salaries. There's a lot of employment law issues there that I can't get into, but nonetheless, I think this still leaves a lot of uncertainty, because essentially businesses are being put on the hook for this, at least in the short term. So I want to provide some insights and recommendations that our firm and me myself would advise any of my clients in this circumstance. Number one is we're not going to be asked to provide detail. You're not going to be asked to provide detailed information right now about whether you've experienced a revenue drop in the periods that we're talking about or not. But we do expect that this is going to be an honor system. However, that doesn't mean that you can't have the records. So my first recommendation is get your records together and make sure that you qualify. Looking at that accounting very carefully, and making sure that you've got that documentation in place, because it's likely that there'll be audits after the fact to ensure that those who are supposed to qualify actually do qualify. They were also pretty strongly worded about folks that may be taking advantage of or might wish to take advantage of these kinds of programs, indicating that if you or anyone in your business provides false or misleading statements or information, or incorrectly takes advantage of the program when you're not supposed to, that there could be obviously financial penalties, but also they're not ruling out the possibility of jail as well. So I just wanted to note that, and that might be particularly applicable for corporate directors of companies as well. So for that reason, again, really document that 30%. And also the other thing to document, and this is the part that I kind of have to laugh at. Sorry that it's not funny, but what they're saying is they really want this payment to be used to pay employees, but they've not made the payments available for at least 6 weeks. But what I think they're getting at is they really don't want businesses to apply for the cash benefit and not actually pay the employees. So they want you to show that you paid the employees for the periods in order to be entitled to that subsidy. Okay, so that's our sort of dire warnings on all this. Practically speaking, this is going to be administered through your CRA My Business account. So if you do not have that type of an account, or if you don't have access to it, I would go out probably as soon as possible and make sure that you have access to that. Some of your accounting firms may have access to it, or you think that they might, through what's known as the represent a client function. But I don't know that this program is going to be administered through that portal. I think it's really going to be administered through each business's My Business account. The other point to note is that this is going to be administered through a portal through that account. So you're going to need that account. And they said that they're not going to have that portal open for at least 3 to 6 weeks, but who knows? So this is not something you can apply for today, and we might not be able to apply for it for a number of weeks, but it is going to be retroactive to March 15th. The other point they noted is to get on direct deposit. If you're not already on direct deposit, make sure your business is, and maybe that's something that you can do while you're organizing the My Business account. So once again, the message that the government really wanted to push out was to sort of rehire your employees and make your best efforts to pay them their pre-crisis wages, or at least pay them the equivalent of that $58,700. Knowing in due course, as long as your business really qualifies, even though I think the payments are going to be delayed by probably 6 weeks here, it's not as though the government is going to not follow through on their commitment. But I think what they're doing is essentially pushing it on the business to maybe obtain financing through some of those other programs that Stephen mentioned to be able to make those minimum payments. So again, I did want to use this time to go into a lot of detail on that wage subsidy programs, and I know that there's potentially a lot of questions on that. But I hope that this was somewhat insightful, and MNP does have some more detailed information on this that I could point you to through a link, either during or after the presentation here. So with that, Brian, can I pass it back to you to maybe moderate some questions and answers on this?
Absolutely, Dylan, and thanks very much for that. That was very insightful and great information for you to share with us. So far, we have, I think, 5 questions in the chat portal there, and I'll do my best to read them off. And the first one's from Prominent Homes. And I think the question is around, is it sales revenue that was recorded in March 2019? And they've referenced purchase agreements written, or possession revenue in 2019. And I think that's an accounting and tax question, Dylan, so I think you get to have that one.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a tax partner and I'm not really the expert on revenue recognition, but I think the point that I want to make, and so maybe I'll invite Mike Rattan to comment on this if he has any thoughts as well, but the point that the government is trying to make is that they just want you to use this, whatever method you were using last year to recognize your revenue, whether that's a possession, hand over the key type situation, or some other method, whatever method you were using in the March period of last year is the same method they want you to use this year. So I don't think that it's like you have to use one method or the other. It's just be consistent so that there's a comparability factor. Mike, do you have any insight on that, particularly for the home builders who may be in the room?
For sure, yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right that you need to be following the same accounting practices that you were following beforehand. They are throwing this thing wide open, and I think the penalties and whatnot for gaming the system are going to be quite severe. And one of the issues I think that needs to be pushed forward is for a number, especially home builders, it's not going to be right now. You know, your sales in the current month are more or less determined by what you did 6 months ago. So this is going to be 6 months in the future. What does this look like for you? And I don't think the government's even had time to think about that. And this will be the evolving nature of the programs and the need for industry organizations and firms like ours to push that agenda forward. And because this is just the nature of the business. It's 6 months down the road. Yes, maybe for certain contractors and whatnot, maybe that impact is felt today, but it is down the road. So I think in terms of the the accounting behind it, I think you've nailed it. Like it really needs to be the same as last year. I wouldn't want to be putting forward those applications and using a different revenue recognition method.
The next question may be another tag team one between you. Do contractors working for a company qualify for the coverage?
So indirectly, the answer is yes, but I want to be super clear that this program, the wage subsidy program, the subsidy is paid to the employer, and all the government wants to ensure is that the employer is in turn turning around and actually paying that to the employee. But whether or not contractors would apply for this is probably a question of their legal nature of their arrangement in the first place. So if you've got contractors on staff, the contractor is the employer, and if the contractor is yourself, you're employing yourself. And like I've alluded to, they put this sort of that falls into that non-arm's length category, which quite frankly they have not been totally clear about whether or not self-employed contractors or business owner managers are actually a bit applicable for this themselves. They've gone as far as to say so, but they've also said that there's this special rule. So I'm very, very hesitant about that situation, especially if you're a one-man contractor. There's a program for you if you're completely laid off and you have no work. That's the emergency response benefit. But this wage subsidy program is what they're really getting at is, I think they're trying to make it so that companies can continue to employ their employees. And they've left that owner contractor area as a bit of a gray area. So I know that's not the answer you're likely looking for, but I think we're going to find out more on that as the days progress here.
Dylan, as that becomes clearer, you can maybe update our team and we can post that on our website. I think might be the best way to handle that.
Sure. And since yesterday, we've got a detailed summary together that we can send you, Brian, that you can circulate.
Awesome, thanks. And I wouldn't be shocked if a week or two from now we're all sitting down having coffee doing this again. So, and
Yeah.
hopefully you guys are up for that. The next question is from Marlo Schaff. And I apologize if I get any of these names wrong. If you've laid off someone, can you bring them back and use the subsidy for them going forward?
Yeah, so the quick answer is yes. That's exactly what they want employers to do is actually, if you have laid people off, bring them back and put them on payroll, at least for this minimum amount. In fact, they went as far as to say that even if you hired a new person, as long as your revenue threshold drop has been met, you can actually claim the subsidy on new employees.
Excellent, thanks for that. The next question is from Paul Duncalf. If the qualifying criteria is purely based on accounting revenue, then this may not be applicable to home builders as we have a revenue lag of 4 to 8 months, i.e. a drop in sales now does not impact revenue for 4 to 8 months. The comparative would not help here. Would not help us here. Any thoughts on how to cope with that?
Yeah, and I think Mike and I kind of alluded to that on our last back and forth there, but home builders and a lot of other companies experience similar lags in their revenue. I think the government has put this program together in good faith in very, very short order, as Steve has alluded to, but they have not considered issues like that. However, as Steve said, I do not think that they are going to be closed to that possibility. This is a reality for a lot of different businesses, including home builders. And so what I would urge you to do is get in contact with your industry associations, including this one, and get in contact with your accounting firms. And those types of problems should be passed up to the government as they're finalizing these rules. And I do think there is a legitimate chance that those types of concerns will be taken into account because that problem persists in so many different kinds of businesses. So even though the rules as they're written today would make this program useless, I think that the intent is to try to keep employers employing employees. And if you went to them with something like that, I don't think the government is going to be closed-minded to that. But I will invite Stephen to comment because I do think that's really important to a lot of different businesses.
Absolutely, and Dylan, I'd echo your comments. I think it's something that through the relationships that MNP has with the federal government, we've raised already as well, and so we'll see, what happens there. I know there's a finance committee meeting that the federal government's having, I think today, and then Parliament will be recalled to actually give them the legislative authority to do this. That's one of the other things to keep in mind in this. Part of what they can't just do lots of these things, we live in a country where the prime minister doesn't have the authority to unilaterally spend $70 billion in one day on purpose. That's by design. So they will actually have to go back into Parliament, get the legislative authority to do these things. And a lot of the details that I think the questions that are coming up will be considered in that process. So I would certainly echo what Dylan said and say over the coming days we'll see some clarity on it, but it's certainly worth tabling if it's a significant issue. And we've already tabled a version of it too.
So Dylan and Steve, I'll just pile on that. Your association for our members attending today has a weekly call with the Canadian Home Builders Association, our counterparts in Ottawa. And we'll make sure that this issue is raised on that Friday call, because they're regularly in touch with the policymakers in Ottawa. So we'll make sure the issue is raised. And I think MNP will, of course, be doing that through their channels, as will a whole bunch of others. So I think that helps. Let's see, just find where I'm at here in the questions. What is the process for new companies that don't have a prior year sales as a comparator?
Okay, so they addressed that as well, and they said they're aware of lots of situations. They don't want to preclude those types of companies, like new startups, from getting this benefit. Again, they're trying to make it so everybody stays working. So what they said is that we'll go ahead and use. So on the radio, Bill Moore said, go ahead and use your February sales. Then come up with something for us. So they do seem pretty flexible about that. But then in the actual release itself, they said, well, we're just going to use sort of a reasonable benchmark to determine whether or not you qualify. So they're going to give more details on that, exactly what that benchmark is going to be and how that's going to work in the coming days. So that means weeks, I think, typically in government speak. So don't assume that you're not going to be able to apply. Keep in mind, we might not even be able to apply for a few weeks, and probably by then you will know the answer to that, exactly how you're supposed to apply those revenue drops to your particular situation as either as a new company or a company that's maybe split up, or two companies that have joined. Again, we just simply have not had time to put those kind of details down, but I think they will.
Thanks, Dylan. And I note that we have 5 more minutes of your time here, so I'll try to get into as many questions as possible. Next one is from Susanna Warner, and it says, as an employee and the accountant for our company, I access the CRA account as a representative. Will I still be able to access the company's business account?
Yeah, and I don't see any reason why not. I just want to make sure that you're using that CRA My Business account. And likely as an employee, if you're an employee of the company, that's probably the portal you're accessing it with. Me as an accountant, like, we access it through a similar but different portal, Represent a Client, which I don't think is going to be what's used to administer this. So I don't think anybody's losing access, and I think just double check that you have the right kind of access.
Thanks, Dylan. Next one is from David Hill. If someone works 2 jobs and is laid off from one due to the COVID-19 crisis, but works the other, are they still able to apply for wage supplementation either at the federal or provincial level? And I think kind of implicit in that question is both get kind of the unemployment benefit and the 75% subsidy.
Yeah, so keep in mind 75% subsidy is going to be paid to employees through their employer, and the sort of that emergency response benefit, or the EI equivalent, is paid to employees who have been laid off or don't have work because of the crisis. And so what the point of this is you could potentially get both, but not in the same period. I think they want to be really clear that nobody's double dipping. So don't assume that you're going to be able to get benefit under both. I think they've designed the program so that you get one or the other.
Okay, thanks for that. Next one is from Stuart Craven. Does the benefit apply to all employees, whether you were going to lay them off due to COVID-19 or retain them regardless of COVID-19, or only to save employees from a job loss?
Yeah, so Stuart, absolutely no distinction has been made in that regard. So our view is that they've made the revenue recognition criteria pretty stringent, but as for who might be applicable in terms of laid off or not being laid off, and what the reason for that is, basically this will apply to any and all employees, save and except those, maybe the owners themselves or employees that might be not at arm's length with the business. So I hope that's answering your question, but the idea there is that this is going to be eligible to be paid on any employee.
Okay, and the last question we have so far in the chat room is from James Howell. And the question is, any idea if the 30% revenue drop requirement applies to the company as a whole, or would a single department or business line, I suppose, within a company qualify?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's the one that we ourselves had, and there's absolutely nothing in the information we've got so far to indicate that you could do this on a department by department basis or a service by service basis. So I believe what they're trying to do is do this as a company as a whole, and all the rules have been circled around legal entity. So they also haven't addressed, like, well, if you have a group of like 12 or 20 legal entities, and one legal entity qualifies and one doesn't. They have not given any rules on how those might be aggregated or not. So I think we'll see that in the legislation. But as for right now, don't assume that you can parse off a service line that's had a bigger decrease than another and be able to have that apply to one service line or the other. I think it's possible that that might come, but as for right now, that's not the way that they've structured it. So we have to wait to see. So that's not a hard no. It's not the way it is now.
So Dylan, I'm going to squeeze in one last question here for you before your 9 o'clock deadline hits. It's again from Susanna Warner. What is the criteria for an employee not at arm's length?
Yeah, so I can squeeze an extra 5 minutes in if you guys like. Non-arm's length is a pretty vague concept, but let's just liken it to if you have the ability to control the entity, or if you're, generally speaking, related to somebody who does. So if you're a 2% shareholder in a company, it's very likely that you're arm's length. If you're a 55% shareholder or you're married to one, you are almost certainly not dealing at arm's length.
Apologies for the bing there. Apparently my daughter's finance report is due, which is interesting. We're right on the dot of 9. And I don't see any other questions popping up. I might just do one, since Dylan was kind enough to give us a little extra bandwidth here in terms of 5 minutes. I'll just do one last call for questions. And we still have the bulk of the people who signed in. I think we topped out at 75 this morning, which is a great turnout here. I'm just getting a text here. Oh, it's a pat on the back for you, Dylan. So for your presentation, so well done. It looks like I think everybody kind of gauged themselves to the 9 a.m. hour, as well as our presenters. So very well done here today. I think there was really good information and ability to address the questions. So on behalf of our membership and the team at BILD, I'd like to thank Mike, Dylan, and Steve for setting aside time for us this morning in such an expert level presentation and really valuable information, as much as it is kind of shifting sands. I think that was a wonderful presentation, so thank you very much. Would like to also thank all of our membership that joined us this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in. As this changes, we'll be back in touch with our good friends at MNP and hopefully inviting them again to have another early morning coffee chat with us here. And I'd also like to thank my team at BILD for all the hard work that they've been doing in terms of organizing these things. It's been an extra stress on them, as it is to all of us, but certainly they've upended their lives to do all this. And so I'm not going to call you all out because I surely forget someone, but I want to thank you all very much and express on behalf of membership and my own personal gratitude for all of you doing the very best in these very difficult times. And with that, I'm going to draw our meeting to a close and give you your mornings back, and ask that you all do your very best to stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll see you